Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Sofía Celi and I'm a cryptography researcher at Brave. And I'm joined today with Martin Albrecht, a professor from Royal Holloway University of London, Dan Jones, a PhD student from Royal Holloway University of London, and Benjamin Dowling, a lecturer from Sheffield University. And today we're going to be talking about our paper and research, Practically Exploitable Cryptographic Vulnerabilities in Matrix. And if you want to learn more about our research and our associated paper, you can go to the link that is listed into this slide. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an outline of our talk, first we're going to be introducing what is secure messaging and also why it's important in the context of Matrix. Then we're going to talk about the cryptography in the Matrix protocol. Then we go forward with our attacks, and then we leave you with some take-home messages and some lessons learned. Also, next slide. So what is Matrix? Matrix is basically this protocol that is used for secure messaging. And why it's important is because secure messaging nowadays is really vital for our societies because it provides security and privacy properties for end users that use it. And it's really vital to look into these protocols and really attest to the security and privacy properties that they provide so we can give assurance to the end users that indeed their conversations are protected and that they are not sent in plain text. Next slide. So as I said, what is Matrix? Matrix is a standard for federated decentralized group messaging, and they also have encryption enabled by default. The flagship client is Element, which is the one that the majority of people use. Basically, they have a threat model in which, of course, they are working over end-to-end encryption, in which the home servers are considered as not trusted entities. But we will see next that maybe this assumption was not taken rightly from the developers of the Matrix protocol. And if you want to contract with other applications, there's of course Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zulip, and Mattermost, which indeed provides some end-to-end secure messaging properties or some decentralized properties, but none of them provide all of the properties that Matrix aims to provide. Next slide. So why would we look at Matrix into our research? First, because it is widely used. As it is listed on the slide, Element has over 60 million users, and some of the users of Matrix include, for example, the French government with an application, an instant messaging application called Ɂagship, and also the German healthcare system, which has adopted Matrix. So as you can see from these slides, Matrix is widely used. The second way we looked at it is because of what I said, because Matrix occupies a unique niche place on the market because it's one of the few secure messaging protocols that works also over a decentralized system. And the third one is because many standardization protocols, such as the IETF, are currently looking at actually standardized secure messaging in a group chat setting with, for example, MLS, and they're also looking at a standardized interoperable secure messaging in which Matrix can be an actual candidate for that. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of how the architecture of Matrix works, you have basically three big entities of Matrix. You have devices, users, and you have the home server. So Matrix, each user is associated with a list of devices. So said devices could be, for example, the laptop, a tablet, or any kinds of computers. And the user registers those lists of devices with the home server. This home server is the entity, is a server, but basically acts as the entity that relays messages in a room between the different users, and it's also the one that has the list of the devices that a user controls. Home servers are the ones that maintain the link between a user account and its devices. And lastly, a room is a collection of the devices that different users hold, and they are the ones who are actually trying to communicate with each other in a group setting. So next slide. And now we go for the cryptography in Matrix.
All right. Thank you very much, Sofía. So now we're moving over to the cryptography that's used in Matrix. And I'm going to give you a really high-level, very quick overview of how these functionalities come together. So Matrix has a set of what we called core functionalities, essentially 3 sub-protocols that are going to be used to actually enable group messaging within Matrix. On the left-hand side here, we have device and entity authentication, where users and their devices generate public keys and then use the cross-signing framework in order to authenticate those public keys to each other. Once you have authenticated those public keys, you are assured that Bob owns the public key that you expect. We then move over to session establishment. So if you're familiar with signal sender keys architecture, this is going to sound very, very familiar to you. What happens is Alice and all of the devices that are communicating within her room establish pairwise ohm channels. You can think of these as roughly similar to signal channels, being established between Alice and her devices and all other devices in the room. Once you've established those ohm pairwise channels, you're going to use that to actually communicate the keying material used to encrypt messages from Alice's device to all other devices in the room, enabling unidirectional group communication through the composition of these mega ohm channels. So once you've established these ohm channels, you send across some keying material using them, and then we get into actual session communication using the ohm subprotocol. So let's dive into these a little bit more. So the cross-signing framework essentially allows you to establish a web of trust. What happens is each user is going to set up an account with a particular home server, which allocates that user a user identifier. The user then generates a set of what we call cross-signing secrets or user secrets. And these are going to be used to authenticate lots of different public keys in order to establish ohm channels. So we have our master key, which serves as the long-term identity of Alice and is also essentially the root of trust from Alice. Everything flows from this master key. This master key is going to be used to sign two other public keys, a user signing key. So the user signing key is going to be used when Alice and Bob get together and verify their master public keys. So now that Alice knows that Bob's master public key is actually owned by Bob, she's going to use her user signing key to sign Bob's master key. Then later, when you meet up with Alice, you're going to be able to verify not just Alice's master public key, but through this route of authentication, you're going to be able to verify Bob's master public key as well. Finally, Alice generates a self-signing key, and this is going to be used to sign per-device public keys. So, Matrix is a device-oriented group messaging protocol. So how is this established? Well, whenever Alice has a new device that she wants to be able to communicate with other users in her room, she's going to log on to the home server with its account credentials, and this is important, the home server is going to allocate that device a device identifier. That's going to be used as a vector in one of our attacks. Then the device generates per-device keys and registers those with the home server. These are the long-term device keys. These are the things that are being signed by Alice's self-signing key, and also the ohm key bundle. And this is going to be used to establish per-device pairwise channels using the ohm protocol. So how does that work? So once Alice has established these ohm key bundle, she's going to upload that ohm key bundle to the home server, and then later at some point, Bob's going to want to communicate with her. So Bob's going to retrieve that public key bundle from the home server, and then use that to establish some shared symmetric key that's going to be used to encrypt messages from Bob to Alice. Importantly, this isn't going to be used to encrypt application layer messages that are actually seen by the user and typed by the user, but this is instead going to be used to communicate session state. This mega-ohm session state is actually what's going to be used to encrypt messages from Alice to the rest of the members of her group. So Bob does triple Diffie-Hellman, he does double ratchet to derive a message key, and then he's going to use that message key to encrypt the mega-ohm session state. So the mega-ohm session state is actually what's going to be used to encrypt messages from Alice to the rest of her room. So what is this actually consisting of? So this mega-ohm session state, which is encrypted using these ohm pairwise channels, consists of the message index, how many times Alice has tried to use this particular state to encrypt messages to the rest of her group, the internal ratchet state, which is this keying material that's going to be used to derive message keys and encrypt actual messages, and the group signing key. This group signing key is going to be used to authenticate ciphertext between Alice and the rest of her group. So the idea here is this internal ratchet state is some symmetric keying material, which means that everyone else in the room knows this. So everyone else in the room can encrypt messages as if they were Alice. This group signing key prevents that sort of within the group insider impersonation attack. This can be split up into outbound and inbound sessions, where the outbound session contains the actual signing key used to authenticate messages from Alice to the rest of her room, and then the inbound session, which contains the public key used to authenticate those. So on a high level, that's the mega-ohm session state. That's what's actually being communicated via these ohm pairwise channels. So what is this internal ratchet state? At its core, mega-ohm is a symmetric ratcheting protocol, similar to the signal symmetric ratcheting protocol used within the double ratchet scheme. So the idea is that every time you want to encrypt a new message between Alice and the rest of her group, she's going to ratchet forward her state, go from I-1 to I, and then she's going to use a key derivation function to derive a message key used for encryption. Then she's going to ratchet the ratchet state forward again, going from I to I+1. The next time she wants to encrypt a message, she takes that ratcheting state, uses a key derivation function, and derives a new message key for encryption. This gets us two properties. The first one is it allows us to derive a new key for each individual message. And secondly, it means that the compromise of Alice's current state, let's say she's at stage I+1, doesn't impact the security of keys derived beforehand. So you can't roll back that ratchet state from I+1 to I in order to derive the same key ki and decrypt previous messages. So we've looked at what the ratchet is. We've looked at what the session state communicated between these devices are. How do you actually use this to encrypt a message? So the sender generates a fresh symmetric key from the ratcheting state, as we saw in the previous slide. We encrypt that message under that key, and then we sign it using the group signing key. That's a single ciphertext and a single signature that is then communicated to the home server, and then that home server distributes out to the rest of the devices within the room in this fan-out way, similar to signal sender keys. Okay, so that's the core functionality of Matrix. What about the backup functionality? So Matrix is interesting. It allows you to be able to recover from device loss by backing up your secrets. And as we saw before, there are essentially two big sets of secrets. There's the user secrets that enables the web of trust, and then there's the mega-ohm session secrets that enable actual group communication within the room. And so for user secrets, we have user secrets backup by the secure secret storage and sharing protocol. This is fairly straightforward. The user generates a backup key, usually from a user passphrase, and then they use that to encrypt the master public key, the user signing key, and the self-signing key, and then upload that ciphertext to the home server. Later, if they lose that device and they want to be able to get those user secrets again, they regenerate that user backup key, retrieve the ciphertext from the home server, and then decrypt it locally, thus allowing them to recover the user signing keys, the master public keys, the user secret keys, and the self-signing key. So that's for the user secret backup. What about mega-ohm, the lowest level of sessions? Well, in that case, Matrix actually has two distinct protocols for doing this, one in an online setting and one in an offline setting. So in the online setting, this is enabled by what we call the key request protocol. And it looks very similar to the way that session initialization or session establishment works using ohm. So let's assume that we have two devices, both owned by Alice, device 1 and device 2. Device 1 has been participating in all of these mega-ohm sessions, and device 2 is a brand new device and wants to be able to participate in those sessions from this point onwards. So device 2 triggers the home server in prompting a key request to device 1. That device is going to do a series of checks. Is device 2 actually owned by Alice? Have I verified this device? Things like that. And if all of these checks go through, then it's going, okay, fine, and it's going to send the mega-ohm session state to device 2 via the ohm pairwise channel shared between the two devices. And so this allows the user's device to share mega-ohm session information with each other. But what happens if both of these devices can't be online at the same time? Matrix provides for you in this case by doing offline session recovery via server-side mega-ohm backups. It's kind of a hybrid of the two approaches that we just saw. The idea is that I, as the user, generate a recovery public key, and I authenticate using some secrets that I own. I'm going to upload that recovery public key to the home server. At some point, let's say a second device of mine wants to be able to back up the mega-ohm sessions, and so they're going to download or retrieve that recovery public key, encrypt the mega-ohm sessions under that recovery public key, and then upload that ciphertext back to the home server. So at some point later, I can download that and recover the mega-ohm sessions. And what's important to note here is that while the recovery public key is authenticated, The actual ciphertext, the actual backup, is not. And that's going to be another point of contention that we're going to use in our attacks. And speaking of attacks, I'm going to pass it over to our resident PhD student, Dan Jones.
Matrix, why it's interesting, and how the cryptography in it works. We get to show you some of the attacks we found whilst we were studying it. So the first two attacks we're going to talk about, really what they're exploiting is too much trust being given to the home server when organizing and kind of controlling the metadata around groups. So in the first case, we're going to look at group membership, which is mostly managed through events. So like Alice might say, oh, hey, I'd like to invite Bob. And then Bob replies, yeah, great, I'd like to join the group. And these are sent via messages in the group, but those messages are not authenticated in any way. There's no cryptographic control over them. So a home server, if it's malicious, can just fake this message exchange and sneak in a user that's maybe under its control to eavesdrop on the messages. So you don't really need to do any kind of cryptographic breaks here, but it's just too much trust is given in the home server to the home server. Similarly, there's another attack where, as we described earlier, there are users, and each user has many devices. And when you want to send a message to a user, you need to figure out their list of devices. And the primary source of this list comes from the home server. And the home server can forge it. And they can even sneak in devices that are under their control. And those devices will be included in groups that the user is a part of and allowed to kind of read the messages that they send and also impersonate that user to an extent. So in both of these attacks, there's quite a bit of damage. Like attackers can eavesdrop on your conversations, but you do end up with some kind of indication in the user interface that this attack is happening. You can see as a user that oh, there's an extra user in this group that probably shouldn't be there. And I think that's the main kind of rationale behind this feature in the first place, because it was almost like a design choice initially. And the idea was that, well, Element shows the list of users, so it's up to the user to figure this out and to inspect it and to be sufficiently eagle-eyed. But we argued that this is a bit burdensome on users, and it's not necessary. There are solutions we can use to solve it. And that's what Matrix are doing. So they're working on a fix for this, where they're going to sign these group membership messages. Cool. So our take-home message that we'd really like to push here is that you can't really get confidentiality without authentication. And what we mean by this is it doesn't matter if you're encrypting messages when you're sending or distributing the decryption keys to anyone who asks. You've got to make sure you only distribute the decryption keys to the people you want. Otherwise, there's no point in encrypting them. Our next attack is on the out-of-band verification in Matrix, and this is that bit in Ben's slides earlier where the two users sign each other's keys. It's called kind of the cross-signing. And the idea of out-of-band verification is that we're doing end-to-end encryption, so we're trying quite hard to not trust the server. But one thing that we often need to trust the server for is to introduce two users. So say at some point the server has to say, oh, by the way, this is Alice, and this is her cryptographic identity. And similarly, this is Bob, and this is Bob's cryptographic identity. And at this point, they can make a kind of a secure channel that the server can't play with. But what if the server just makes up fake cryptographic identities and distributes them? Well, they can do kind of this active proxying attack, this malware in the middle, where I just proxy all the messages using these fake cryptographic identities and get control of, things like the messages that are sent, get to read them, get to impersonate. So that's not very good, and that's the problem out-of-band verification is trying to solve. The short authentication string protocol is one of the ways Matrix solves this. Essentially, the way it works is that the two, Alice and Bob, will set up some kind of secure channel between the two of them, and they're then going to construct the special string that encodes their view of the secret channel. And it's a special string because if they have differing views of the secret channel, such that it's been tampered with, then these strings won't match. So what they can do is, well, in this protocol, they get encoded as a nice little string of emojis, and you can maybe phone someone up or meet in person, and you can kind of check that they match. And if they don't match, then you know the channel's been tampered with. If they do match, well, now you've got a secure channel that you know hasn't been tampered with, so you can send your long-term cryptographic identities over that, and you will end up with kind of like you've cemented a real root of trust that you know the server has no control over. In our attack, the home server is able to trick devices into, instead of sharing in that final step, instead of sharing the cryptographic identity they created, they accidentally share one of the home server controls. So I'm just going to detail how that trick works. How do you trick devices into doing this? Well, there are two types of verification. Sometimes there are two users verifying each other, like we spoke about before. But other times, there are two devices. Maybe I've logged in on my laptop, and I'm already logged in on my mobile phone. I need to do some kind of verification to make sure their connection isn't tampered with. And to distinguish these two cases, they have a key identifier field in that message that's sent in the final step of the SAS protocol. In this key identifier field, in the first case, when it's two users, they send the user's cryptographic identity. But in the second case, when it's two devices, they send the device's device identifier. And this is worrying because it's controlled by the home server. And the home server can, and this is what they do in this attack, generate their own fake cryptographic identity for a user and allocate it as the device identifier. And now, when that device does a verification, it'll send its device identifier, and the receiving party will interpret that as a user's cryptographic identity at the end of this process, and will now, instead of trusting that device, they trust the cryptographic identity that the home server controls. And this enables a complete break of the protocol. The attacker can eavesdrop on the conversations, they can impersonate users, and there's no indication in the user interface other than a slightly funky looking device identifier if you look closely. So it's a pretty damaging attack, a complete break. So we should probably try to avoid it. And how should we do that? Well, the key problem here was that these device identifiers and these cryptographic identities share the same space. It's hard to distinguish the two. You can make a valid device identifier that is also a valid cryptographic identity, and that's kind of bad. You want to separate these domains, and this is our kind of the take-home message we're pushing for here, is domain separate everything you can. Yes, cool. So the next three attacks kind of iteratively build upon each other, starting with an impersonation attack. Then we kind of strengthen the impersonation attack a little bit more, and that allows us to break the confidentiality of the protocol as well. So to start with, our first impersonation attack. So earlier, Ben was talking about the key request protocol and how it's important that when you're sending secrets, you're sending these decryption keys to your other devices, you check that you actually trust this device by checking this kind of web of trust and checking that it's been verified. But it's also super important that when you accept secrets, you only accept your decryption keys from devices that you trust as well. And this was the implementation mistake that Matrix had made. They'd only implemented the verification on the sending side and not on the receiving side. So a device, a malicious device, can generate a new session and send via this key request protocol a message to Alice to say, oh, hey, by the way, this is Bob's decryption keys, the decryption keys for Bob's session. And then later on, Alice will just say, yeah, great, thanks. And it'll assign anything that decrypts, any messages that decrypt from that session as coming from Bob, even though they came from the attacker. And we do this on the mega-ohm level, so this a lowest group messaging layer. So yeah, what's the damage? Well, yeah, you can get some kind of impersonation, but importantly, the messages that are decrypted using keys that are sent via this key request protocol end up with a little flag in the user interface quite often that says, like, you should probably trust this a little bit less than normal. And we would really like to do better than that. So that's what our next impersonation attack does. The key idea behind this impersonation attack is that whilst key requests, messages sent via these key request protocol are flagged as kind of like slightly less trustworthy, if the session came from like a normal mega-ohm session setup from the person who actually owns the session, they are not flagged. They're seen as fully trusted. But we've already got an impersonation attack on that person. So what we can do is we can simulate, we can pretend that we're that person using our previous impersonation attack to start a new session, not using the key request protocol, but simulating the normal session setup. And this kind of works, and it's great, but there's one roadblock, and that's that our previous impersonation only worked on the mega-ohm level, this lowest level, but it's expected that mega-ohm sessions are initiated using the ohm protocol. That's like what the specification says. Luckily for us, this wasn't there were no checks. So we could just do the attack as described, simulate this session setup, and this gives you a full impersonation that provides no kind of evidence to the user that it should be slightly less trustworthy. So now we've got a nice, strong impersonation attack. Our next step is to try to convert this into a confidentiality attack. So we were talking about these mega-ohm backups earlier. And the way this works is that you've got these keys, you want to back them up to the server, so you encrypt them using a symmetric key, and you share them between your trusted devices. Cool. But we just got an impersonation attack, so potentially what you could do is maybe just ask them, whilst you're sharing these encryption keys, these backup keys, you can use your impersonation attack to share a key that you control. And so that's what happens. The attacker, using the previous impersonation attacks, says, oh, hey, by the way, we're using this new encryption key now. Let's upload our backups using that. And they all go, oh, great, you're a trusted device, because we've done the impersonation attack. And they will upload their keys straight to the server using the encryption key that the attacker controls. And this gives them access to all the messages. So combine these three attacks give us a complete break of the confidentiality and authentication in that protocol. We can read and we can impersonate users. And the take-home message, just to drill it down again, as the same as before, there is no confidentiality without authentication. And in this case, we saw how an authentication break, these impersonation attacks, let us eventually break the confidentiality of the protocol as well. We have one final little attack that we found, and this is a theoretical attack, where the integrity of this initialization vector in the AES encryption for backups wasn't protected. And this means that the scheme is not IND-CCA secure. This is like a theoretical break of the confidentiality that you get from a lack of integrity protection. But importantly, whilst it's theoretically only a theoretical break, it was dangerously close to being a practical attack as well. So again, this take-home message, similar to the ones before, is you can't get good, real confidentiality without integrity. And these security properties are intertwined. So just to recap, we came up with a bunch of attacks that all work with different parts of the protocol. Some that are more implementation focused, some are more on the design, attack just the fundamental design of the protocol. But overall, they've primarily been fixed. Importantly, attacks 2 to 5, we were able to develop proof of concept code for all of them. So they certainly definitely do work. And we were able to get these breaks in practice. But luckily for us, they've all been, well, the vast majority of them have been mitigated by Matrix. And you can kind of read more about that in our the CVEs. I'll pass on to Martin.
All right. So Dan already gave you a few kind of take-home messages, but I want to leave you with one bigger take-home message from this work. And the first thing kind of to appreciate here is like maybe that came across, it's like this is a complex protocol, right? There's a lot of different sub-protocols, and what Matrix is trying to do here is really hard, right? This is a hard problem that they're trying to solve. They're trying to do secure group messaging in a multi-device setting that's also scalable to thousands of devices in a single group, right? That in itself is a daunting task. They also say, like, we want backups, we want history sharing, right? Because we, think that this is what users expect of a chat protocol. They want authentication, identity verification, right? But you don't want to kind of verify every device, so they want to build like some infrastructure that makes this somewhat easy, somewhat seamless to use. Once I've verified that you are you, I can chat to all of your devices when you get a new phone, it's fine. They also, and this really sets them apart, want to do this in a federated setting, right? So in the same way as email kind of back in the old days kind of was a federated protocol, now it's, no, let me not go there. They want to do that the same for chat, right? So you have these different home servers, they talk to each other. And they want to support a variety of clients across many platforms. This is a complex problem to solve, right? So let's just appreciate, and then in some sense you could say it's a hard problem to solve, some mistakes are inevitable. Okay, fine. So the standard response. So we've been around the block a few times, kind of with some attacks, and like the standard response that people give when these sort of cryptographic attacks are published are don't roll your own crypto or crypto is hard. This is not the take-home message that we want to leave you with. This is not what we want to say. Of course, cryptography is hard, like is any other science or any other area of computer science or engineering. Like, yes, hard problems are hard. This doesn't set cryptography apart from any other of the hard problems that all of us, all people, solve all day. We have to tackle with a lot of complexity here, but the science of cryptography gives us the tools to do that. Right? So yes, there are many different protocols, and how do they interact? How do we reason about that? And modern cryptography gives us the tools of doing precisely that. That is, we can reason about cryptographic protocols. We can say, like, if you have an attack against this protocol, then you have also solved like some computationally hard problem, such as factoring big numbers, for example. Right? So we have, and these are formal proofs. We can write theorems and we can prove, like, if an attacker can do that, they can also do this other thing that the internet runs on, right? So Matrix being broken is not my concern, but if there's an attack here, then it will be really big news and we have bigger fish to fry. So that is something that the science of cryptography gives you. So what you should say in the future, whenever you see such an attack, is cryptography needs security models and proofs. That is really the #1 take-home message I want to leave here. As much fun as it is to give a black hat talk, ideally we wouldn't have to be here. And in fact, we don't have to be here because we have tools to prevent these sorts of attacks from happening by doing formal proofs and formal theorems. ଂagship put this very eloquently on Twitter. I'm just going to leave that hanging here for a second. Right? And I feel seen. All right. So that is all we wanted to talk to you about. We have time, about 5 minutes, for some questions. So please line up on the kind of in-room microphones if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention.